The text message flashed across the screen of the burner phone. An anomaly of raw panic in a device reserved for bloodshed and business. Vincenzo Romano, known in the shadows of the city as the Phantom, stilled his hand mid-gesture, the ice in his whiskey glass ceasing its gentle clink. His underboss, Luca, was in the middle of a report, his voice a venomous drone detailing the encroachments of a rival family. But Vincenzo's eyes, the color of storm-tossed sea, were locked on the 7 desperate words glowing in the dim light of his penthouse office. "He's choking, Mom." The grammar was a mess, the sentiment a primal scream. It was clearly a mistake, a wrong number dialed in a moment of life-or-death terror. Luca paused, noticing his Don's attention had been stolen. "Boss? The Carbone family will not wait forever." Vincenzo raised a single, dismissive finger, his focus absolute. Something about the message pierced the layers of ice that had formed around his heart decades ago. It was the word Mom. A ghost of a memory flickered behind his eyes. His own mother, her face pale, her breath catching in her throat, not from a piece of food, but from the sight of her husband's blood on the marble floor. He had been a boy, helpless. He was not a boy anymore. He who could command death with a nod was suddenly transfixed by a stranger's plea to preserve life. It was a bizarre, unwelcome impulse, an inefficiency, a weakness. Yet he could not look away. The desperation felt authentic. In his world, authenticity was a rarer commodity than gold. He typed a reply, his thumb, more accustomed to approving executions, moving with uncharacteristic speed. His sharp, commanding reply appeared on Amelia's cracked phone screen, a beacon in her suffocating panic. "Send address now." The authority in those 4 words was absolute, chilling, and yet, paradoxically, a lifeline. Her mother, Clara, was turning a terrifying shade of blue, her hands clawing at her throat, her eyes wide with the terror Amelia felt mirrored in her own soul. Her fingers had fumbled trying to text her brother, a paramedic who lived 30 minutes away. She must have mistyped the number. There was no time to question the stranger's identity. There was no time for anything but a desperate gamble. Her thumbs flew across the keyboard, sending her modest apartment address into the digital void. A prayer cast to an unknown god. In his penthouse, Vincenzo stood, tossing the whiskey onto the plush Persian rug where it sizzled on a stray ember from the fireplace. "Luca, you are dismissed." Luca's eyes narrowed. "But Vincenzo, the Carbone situation is no longer your concern for tonight." Vincenzo cut him off, his voice dropping to the low growl that made grown men tremble. "Silvio," he called out. His consigliere, a man with a face like a weathered roadmap of their brutal history, entered from the adjoining room. Silvio's gaze flickered to the phone in Vincenzo's hand. "A problem, Don Romano?" Vincenzo pocketed the device. "A potential one. Get the car. No guards. Just you and me." Silvio's brow furrowed. "Is this wise? To go yourself? To an unknown location?" Vincenzo's jaw tightened. "Wisdom has nothing to do with it," he murmured, grabbing the tailored jacket of his suit. "It is an instinct." He walked past his consigliere, the scent of expensive cologne and unresolved violence trailing in his wake. He didn't understand the force pulling him towards this stranger's crisis, but for the first time in years, he felt the pull of something other than power or vengeance. It was a dangerous, intoxicating feeling. The roar of a high-performance engine tore through the quiet working-class street, culminating in the squeal of tires as a gleaming black sedan, sleek and predatory as a panther, slid to a halt in front of Amelia's rundown building. It was not the reassuring wail of an ambulance siren she had prayed for. Amelia, who had been trying futilely to perform the Heimlich maneuver she'd only ever seen in movies, froze at the sound of heavy, urgent footsteps pounding up the stairs. The door to her small apartment burst open, not kicked, but opened with a force that suggested the wood and lock were mere suggestions. 2 men filled the doorway, their silhouettes framed by the dim hallway light. They were dressed in immaculate dark suits that seemed to absorb the light, costing more than every piece of furniture she owned combined. One was older with watchful, weary eyes. The other was breathtaking. He was tall and broad with sharp cheekbones, a severe jaw, and eyes that held the chilling depth of a winter ocean. He was the most beautiful and terrifying man she had ever seen. He didn't speak. His gaze swept the room in a fraction of a second, assessing her, her gasping mother, the threadbare couch, the peeling paint. It was a look of absolute command. He strode forward, his movements fluid and precise. He gently but firmly pushed Amelia aside. "Silvio, handle her," he ordered, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the small room. He positioned himself behind Clara, wrapping his strong arms around her frail torso. With a single, expertly applied upward thrust, he dislodged the obstruction. The piece of steak shot out, landing on the worn linoleum floor. Clara collapsed forward, gasping, gulping in precious air as color flooded back into her cheeks. Amelia watched, stunned into silence, her heart hammering against her ribs not just from the preceding panic, but from the raw lethal grace of the man who had just saved her mother's life. He was no doctor. He was no hero. He was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Vincenzo straightened up, his movements economical. He looked down at the woman now weeping with relief, then his gaze settled on Amelia. He saw the terror in her wide hazel eyes, but beneath it, he saw a flicker of defiance, a spark of untamed fire that intrigued him. He noted the worn-out furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the small kitchen table, the way Amelia's simple dress, though clean, was frayed at the hem. He saw their struggle, their quiet desperation, and it stirred something in him. This was the world he had clawed his way out of, a world of helplessness he had sworn he would never experience again. He had built an empire of fear to insulate himself from this very feeling. Yet here he was, standing in the heart of it, drawn by a stranger's plea. "A life for a life," he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of an unbreakable contract. Amelia flinched, pulling her mother closer protectively. "What?" "I don't have any money." A dark, humorless smile touched Vincenzo's lips. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to tilt her head back to look at him. He could smell the faint scent of lavender soap on her skin, a stark contrast to the expensive perfumes of the women who usually occupied his world. "I have no need of your money, Passerato," he murmured, the Italian endearment for little sparrow sounding both possessive and strangely tender on his tongue. "You have incurred a debt of a different kind. I saved a life precious to you. That makes you indebted to me." Amelia's chin lifted, that spark of fire flaring. "I didn't ask for a Mafia Don to show up at my door. I just wanted help." Vincenzo's smile widened slightly. He admired her courage, even if it was foolish. "And help arrived. The universe in its strange wisdom sent me. Now the debt is on the ledger." He reached out, his finger tracing the line of her jaw, his touch shockingly gentle. She trembled but did not pull away. "I will be in touch to collect," he whispered. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and was gone. Silvio gave her a single, pitying look before following his boss. The black car peeled away into the night, leaving behind a profound silence, the lingering scent of power and Amelia, trembling in the wreckage of her ordinary life. 2 days later the summons came. Not a text, but Silvio, appearing at her door like a specter in a tailored suit. There was no request, only a quiet, implacable command. Amelia found herself in the back of the same black sedan, the leather cool against her skin, as it wound its way up a private road into the hills overlooking the city. The car passed through iron gates adorned with a snarling wolf crest, the Romano family sigil, and pulled up to a villa that was less a home and more a palace. It was a fortress of glass and stone, surrounded by immaculate gardens where blood-red roses grew in disciplined rows. Vincenzo was waiting for her on a terrace overlooking the glittering cityscape. He was dressed down in black linen trousers and a simple white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the tanned column of his throat. He looked less like a gangster and more like a fallen god. "Welcome to my home, Amelia," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. A table was set with coffee and pastries she could never afford. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice tight with apprehension. He leaned forward, his intense gaze pinning her in place. "I told you. A debt is owed," he explained the terms. Her mother would receive the best medical care money could buy, a private nurse, a comfortable life. All her debts would be paid. In return, Amelia would stay here with him. "You want a prisoner?" she spat, horrified. "I want a piece of light in my world of shadows," he countered, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "I saw the fire in your eyes, the purity. In my world such things are a myth." You are my rosa senza spine, my rose without thorns. I want to keep you safe. I want to keep you near me from a balcony above. His underboss, Luca, watched the scene unfold. A venomous sneer twisted his lips. Vincenzo the Phantom, the most ruthless Don in the city's history, was being bewitched by a slip of a girl from the slums. This wasn't a power move, it was a sickness. A fatal weakness. And Luca knew just how to exploit a weakness. Amelia's life transformed into a surreal paradox. She was a captive in a gilded cage, surrounded by breathtaking luxury, but suffocated by the constant, silent presence of armed guards. She wore silk dresses provided for her, ate food prepared by a private chef, and looked out at a view that belonged on a postcard. Yet she was a prisoner. She fought him not with physical force, which was useless, but with words, with her unwavering spirit. During the long, quiet evenings, he would find her in the vast two-story library. You read the Stoics, she observed one night, pulling a leather-bound copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations from the shelf. Strange for a man who controls his world with emotion and violence. Vincenzo, who had been watching her from the doorway, stepped into the light. A man must understand the philosophies he chooses to reject, he responded, his voice a low rumble. I do not seek tranquility. I seek control. You can't control everything, she shot back, her hazel eyes flashing. You couldn't control the fact that my mother was choking. You couldn't control that I texted your number. He moved closer. The space between them crackling with an energy she was beginning to crave as much as she feared it. No, he conceded, his voice softening. But I can control what happens next. Their battles of will became a strange, intoxicating dance. In the rose garden under the watchful eye of the moon, he would tell her stories of his rise to power, sanitizing the bloodshed but revealing the scars it left on his soul. She, in turn, would tell him about her simple life, about the joy of a shared meal with her mother, about dreams that didn't involve conquering enemies. One evening, Silvio found Vincenzo staring at a single red rose he'd picked. She is making you soft, Don Romano, the old consigliera warned gently. The other families, your own men, they see it. Luca whispers that the phantom is becoming a ghost of his former self. Vincenzo crushed the rose in his fist, thorns digging into his palm. Love, he growled, staring at the blood welling in his hand, is worse than a hit. It is slower and it costs you more. Luca saw his moment approaching. Vincenzo's obsession was becoming more blatant, his focus splintering. He spent more time with the girl than with his capos. He was distracted, and a distracted Don was a vulnerable one. Luca, whose ambition burned like a corrosive acid in his gut, began to weave his web. He arranged a parley with the Carbone family, ostensibly to settle the territorial dispute he'd been reporting on weeks ago. He assured Vincenzo it was a simple matter, a formality. He insisted Vincenzo attend personally to show strength, and he subtly suggested bringing Amelia, arguing that showcasing his new treasure would be a power play, a sign that he was so untouchable he could bring a civilian to a mob meeting. Vincenzo, his judgment clouded by his desire to keep Amelia close, agreed. The meeting was set for a neutral location. A vast, abandoned warehouse by the docks, a classic stage for underworld diplomacy. As their car pulled up, Silvio felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. This feels wrong, Vincenzo, he murmured from the front seat. It's too quiet. Before Vincenzo could respond, the trap was sprung. The warehouse doors slammed shut, and the cavernous space was plunged into darkness, immediately followed by the blinding flash of muzzle fire. It was an ambush. Rival shooters, paid by Luca, opened fire from the catwalks above. Luca himself fired the first shot towards Vincenzo, deliberately wide, to sell the illusion of a chaotic firefight. Vincenzo's reaction was instantaneous. He didn't reach for his own weapon. He threw his body over Amelia's, shielding her as they crashed to the concrete floor. He was a wall of muscle and resolve, absorbing the impact, protecting her from the chaos. A searing pain tore through his shoulder as a bullet meant for his heart found its mark. He grunted, the sound swallowed by the deafening roar of gunfire as Silvio and his other loyal guards returned fire. Amelia screamed, the sound a thin thread of terror in the symphony of violence. The smell of cordite and blood filled the air. And in that moment, the gilded cage shattered, replaced by the stark, brutal reality of the world she had entered. The firefight was short and brutal. Silvio and his men were ruthlessly efficient, neutralizing the attackers with the cold precision of wolves. As silence descended, punctuated only by the drip of water from the high ceiling and Amelia's ragged breaths, Vincenzo pushed himself up, his face a pale mask of pain. The left shoulder of his white shirt was stained a brilliant, spreading crimson. "Get her out of here," he ground out to Silvio, his eyes never leaving Amelia's terrified face. Back at the villa, the sterile quiet of Vincenzo's private wing was a jarring contrast to the earlier violence. A discreet doctor, long on the Romano payroll, had stitched the wound and left, leaving them alone. Amelia, her hands still trembling, insisted on changing the dressing herself. The silk of her dress was torn and stained with grime from the warehouse floor. As she dabbed the antiseptic on the raw, puckered flesh around his stitches, a tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, landing near the wound. Vincenzo flinched, not from the sting of the alcohol, but from the sight of her tear. It was a hotter pain than any bullet. "This is my fault," he whispered, his voice raw with a guilt she had never heard from him before. "I brought you into this." "No," she said, her own voice surprisingly steady. "I chose to be in your car." She gently placed a fresh bandage over the wound, her touch lingering on his skin. The terror of the ambush had acted as a crucible, burning away her fear and leaving behind a terrifying, undeniable clarity. She loved this dangerous broken man. His gaze met hers, the usual stormy gusto stripped away, revealing a depth of vulnerability that took her breath away. "Before you," he began, his voice hoarse, "there was nothing but darkness. My father was killed in front of me. My uncle, who I trusted like a brother, betrayed our family for power. I became the phantom to ensure no one could ever touch me again. I built walls of stone in fear. And then you texted." He reached up with his good hand, cupping her face. "You are the only thing I am afraid of losing, Mia Rosa." My light. He pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was not about possession or control, but about desperation, confession, and a raw, soul-deep surrender. The world of violence and blood outside faded away, leaving only the two of them, a wounded king and the innocent who had somehow claimed his heart. While Vincenzo recovered, his physical wound healing far faster than the one in his pride, Silvio began his own quiet, methodical investigation. The old consigliera's loyalty was absolute, and his instincts, honed over 50 years in the syndicate, screamed that the Carbone ambush was an inside job. It was too sloppy for a rival family, yet too precise in its targeting of Vincenzo. He started with the shell casings, then the whispers among the lower-level soldiers. He reviewed the security feeds from the villa, his sharp eyes catching a flicker of something he'd previously dismissed. Luca, leaving his quarters an hour before the parley, carrying a second, unregistered burner phone. Silvio's blood ran cold. He dug deeper, leveraging old contacts, calling in ancient favors. Within 48 hours, he had his proof. A recorded conversation between Luca and a Carbone capo, planning the ambush, with Luca promising to deliver a distracted, vulnerable Vincenzo. He brought the evidence to Vincenzo, who sat in the library, his arm in a black silk sling. As Vincenzo listened to his cousin's voice plotting his death, his face became stone. "I noticed something," Amelia said softly, entering the room. She had been quiet and watchful since the attack. At the warehouse just before the lights went out, Luca looked up at the catwalks. He wasn't looking at the Carbones. He was looking at where the shooters appeared. He was anticipating it, her emotional insight, her attention to the small human details Vincenzo's world often overlooked, provided the final damning piece of the puzzle. The betrayal was absolute. Vincenzo stood, his eyes blazing with a cold fire that was far more terrifying than any outburst of rage. "Call a meeting," he commanded Silvio. "All the capos. And bring me my cousin." The showdown took place in the grand dining room, under a crystal chandelier that dripped light onto the long polished table. Luca, arrogant and unsuspecting, walked in, his face arranged in a mask of concern. He stopped short when he saw Vincenzo at the head of the table, flanked by Silvio, with Amelia standing slightly behind him, her presence an undeniable statement. Vincenzo played the recording. The color drained from Luca's face. "It's a lie. Fabricated," he stammered. his eyes darting around at the stony faces of the other capos. Vincenzo, she has poisoned your mind. He pointed a trembling finger at Amelia. Vincenzo rose slowly to his full height. You broke the code, he said, his voice deceptively calm. Omerta. Family. You betrayed both for a taste of power you did not earn. He nodded once to Silvio. The end was swift, brutal, and silent. It was a chilling affirmation of the laws that governed their world. A world Amelia now understood completely. With Luca's treachery exposed and dealt with, a new tense calm settled over the Romano Empire. The attempted coup and Vincenzo's decisive response had solidified his power in a way no amount of simple intimidation ever could. But the man who now sat on the throne was not the same one who had answered a random text message weeks ago. The ice around his heart had not just been pierced, it had been shattered. The phantom was still feared, but he was no longer a ghost. He was flesh and blood, a man who had bled for love. One evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the sky, he found Amelia on the terrace, watching the city lights begin to twinkle to life below. She was no longer a captive. The guards were still present, but their purpose had shifted from keeping her in to keeping the world out. He stood beside her, his presence solid and comforting. The debt is paid, Amelia, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. My mother is safe and cared for. You have honored your side of the bargain. You are free to go. He turned to face her, his expression serious, vulnerable. You can walk away from this life, from me. I will have you driven anywhere you want to go. You will never have to worry about money or anything ever again. He offered her an escape, a return to the light. Amelia looked at this powerful, dangerous man who had confessed his fears to her, who had shielded her with his own body, who had learned to love. She thought of her old life, a life of quiet desperation and safety. It seemed like a faded photograph of someone else. Here, in the heart of the storm, she had found a strange and terrible peace. She had found a home. She stepped closer to him, rising on her toes to press a soft kiss to his lips. My place is here, she whispered against his mouth. With you. A slow, genuine smile, the first she had ever seen from him, spread across Vincenzo's face. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. He was still a king of a dark and violent world, but he was no longer ruling it alone. He had found his queen. As they stood together, a united force overlooking their kingdom of shadows and light, a question hangs in the air, a whisper to all who watch their story unfold. Can a mafia boss's heart, scarred by betrayal and bathed in blood, truly survive the redeeming power of love? Tell me what you think of their epic romance in the comments. Share this story if you believe in love against all odds, and don't forget to tell us your own incredible love stories.